Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay.
Can't hear you.
It's on.
Your mic is on, just not
Just put
loud.
it closer to your throat. Where do you want to
I
sit?
will try. Is that better?
Just kept
Okay.
two people remote.
In other words, I need to try to eat it. Okay. I'm Dinah Bain. I'm the president of the Middlebury branch of AAUW. We sponsor the speaker series with the Elsley Library, and tonight it's also being sponsored by the Education Studies Program Chair Jonathan Miller Lane at Middlebury College. AAUW is a national organization for women, to support women and girls, and for membership for women who are part of the university, who are graduated from the university or college. They have given out one of the world's largest sources of funding for graduate women, $29.6 million in funding since between FY20 and FY25, almost 1,600 awardees. So there's a lot of money coming from the national AAUW. Our branch has monthly meetings from September to May. We do the speaker series, and I'll tell you in a minute what the next speakers are about. We do a postgraduate education fundraiser, which is a raffle where you choose which things you're kind of bidding on. And we give awards to high school students for excellence in languages, science, and the arts. And we have been supporting Afghan girls who are attending Middlebury College. The speakers and I will remember, Kathy. The speakers this is our last speaker for 2025. In 2026, we have, on February 17th, we have the meeting is called The Gift of Failure by Jessica Leahy at the Middlebury High School. On March 17th, we have the State of Healthcare in Vermont, which is Owen Foster, who's the chair of the Vermont Green Mountain Care Board, thank you, and Mike Fisher, who's the liaison for the legislature. And on April 21st, Tom Hanley is going to talk about scams and prevention. And the thing that I need to remember for Kathy is the exits are, whoops, I can't move my arms around. The exits are up there. That is not an exit. If you go in there, you're going to wind up in a closet. You don't want to. So I will give the mic over to Mary Gill, who will introduce our speakers. And we do have 2 mics, so when it comes time for questions, we can pass them around.
Okay, good evening. I'm Mary Gill. I'm a member of the AAUW, and I helped to arrange this and want to welcome Peter Conlon. He's one of our speakers, and we have Superintendent Wendy Baker, who is also going to be speaking with us. I'll give you a better introduction in a minute. But Peter, he's very busy in Chicago, welcoming a new grandchild into the world. And he says it's its first girl, so we're very happy that we can be part of her world right now. So Peter he's in the state legislature. He was elected originally in 2017 to represent Addison 2 district, which includes Cornwall, Goshen, Leicester, Ripon, and Salisbury. In 1990, Peter and his family moved to Cornwall, and he was an active and engaged civic member of our community. His resume as an active civic member is quite extensive. He was a reporter for the Addison Independent, which is interesting. He was a dairy labor specialist working with farmers around the state. He started a move management company, which I understand is very successful because I've had people who've used you and have been appreciative of your help. He's a volunteer firefighter, and importantly, he did multi-terms as a school board member and was board chair in both the high school when we were separated And when we consolidated as a school district, he served as the school board member. So currently, Peter is in the legislature. He is the chair of the education committee and for the House. So I'm going to turn this over to Peter so he can give you a little bit of background of what's going on with Act 73. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Mary, and thanks to everybody there for accommodating me being in Chicago. It's a new role for me. I got a 6.5-month-old granddaughter, and so it's been very fun providing childcare this week. So as Mary said, you know, I've been around a while, been around educational issues for quite some time. Covering the school board was part of my beat at the Addison Independent. And then when I left there, I was no longer a journalist. I was allowed to participate in things like being on the school board. So I left the Independent in 2004 and ran for the Middlebury Union High School Board in 2005. And then between that and then the Addison Central School District Board, I was on those two for about 17 years. I was the last chair of the high school board and the first chair of the unified board. And then when I became a legislator in 2017, I was assigned to the Education Committee, and I have been there ever since. And I've been chair for the last 3 years, and I'm about to start my 10th year in the legislature come January, and I'll continue on as chair of the Education Committee. So Act 73 certainly is in the news a lot, as it has been. I thought I'd talk a little bit about how we got here and some of the realities of what Act 73 is, and also importantly, what Act 73 is not. So, you know, the the long story short is that Vermont has seen really steady declining enrollment, as much as the Northeast has, over the past 40 years. It's really been about 1,000 students per year on average over 40 years. About the time I graduated from Montpelier High School, the state had about 123,000 students, and we're down to about 83,000. And unfortunately, that trend does not seem to be stopping. There are some predictions that we'll be down in the 60,000 plus range in 15 to 20 years. And so that's really had a ripple effect, as have our demographics in Vermont have had on many areas, from housing to healthcare and especially to education. Changes to education have been sort of out there for quite some time. We had Act 60 two dozen years ago. And then, of course, Act 46, which saw a lot of consolidation, largely around what were existing supervisory unions into single board governance supervisory districts. That's what we saw in the Addison Northwest, Mount Abe, and Addison Central school districts, where we were all groups of small boards with a union high school board coming under just instead one governing board in each of those districts. So let's come up to 2024. In 2024, on town meeting day, we saw really a record number of school budgets defeated. I think it was the majority of budgets across the state, kind of unprecedented. It came at a time when the school budget increases were going to translate into some really significant property tax increases. It was kind of a perfect storm of events that came along. We had the end of COVID-era federal spending. Many of the sort of services for students that COVID-era spending was paying for, well, the student need didn't go anywhere, but the funding for it did. We had very high costs for healthcare increases, and we had changes in the weighting formula for how we sort of assign state dollars to students. So what we really saw come out of the legislature in 2024 was a scramble to react to it as best we could. We created the Commission on the Future of Public Education, essentially assigning the task to a group of educators and legislators to sort of figure out what the best way forward is for the state to address, all of these factors that have been brewing over all of these decades. So that is what passed, sort of in objection to a gubernatorial veto. But then we move into sort of summer and fall 2024, which was the political season. And, a lot of this is politics related, and policy related. So in 2024, we saw voters, I think, really react to affordability and property taxes, in particular in Vermont. We saw the end of the Democratic supermajority in the state Senate and in the House. Many new Republicans were elected, and many Democrats, including myself, faced challengers who earned surprising support despite sort of limited exposure to the public. And as well as, the easy reelection of the governor and his continued popularity among the people of Vermont. With that change, and that change certainly was as apparent in Addison County, as we saw a number of prominent incumbent Democrats kicked out of office by Republicans. That change really brought sort of a new political reality to the legislative process. And it also coincided with the governor, I'd say for the first time since he became governor. He and I sort of took our political offices at the same time, nearly 10 years ago, really started talking about education in more than just sort of, we need a cradle to career solution. He actually proposed what was the original version of H454. The basic outline being, we need larger districts. In his proposal, it was 5 for the entire state, and a funding system where essentially the state awards dollars to districts based on the student profile, what we call a foundation formula, where each student is weighted based on their need, and there's a dollar amount assigned to each student, and that money is given to school districts for school districts to then manage to the dollar. That proposal and the governor's sort of push behind it, as well as the Secretary of Education, I would say really kind of took over the agenda, and as well as the sort of new political realities within the Senate and the House. And we took up 454 with great seriousness and great sort of bipartisan discussion. It went through a number of committees and iterations, and ultimately what resulted was what we see today as Act 73, and was ultimately signed into law by the governor. So Act 73 sort of maintains the basic philosophy that the state should move from 110 school districts, which includes sort of 53 superintendencies or 53 central offices, down to some smaller number. And that we need to move to a funding system where the state has a bit more control over how much is being paid, but also recognizes that different students have different needs. What Act 73 did specifically was created the redistricting task force that you're hearing much about in the news, whose job it was to submit to the legislature for 2026 up to 3 proposals for new configurations across the state. It also specifically assigned some jobs to the Agency of Education in terms of coming up with things like graduation requirements, a unified calendar across the state, things that sort of would lend itself to making a transition to fewer larger districts easier and sort of more consistency across the state. Just to back up a little bit, our current funding system consists of school districts doing the hard and careful work that they do, and I was part of that for many years, and I know it is hard and careful work that is done, but proposing budgets that they feel will pass muster with voters. Once those budgets ultimately do, Then sort of the collection of all of those proposals gets sent to the state, and it is the legislature's job to adjust tax rates in order to fund them. The state really doesn't control how much is spent, but it controls sort of how the money is raised every year. And so Act 73 seeks to sort of flip that so that the state is providing what we could just call grants to school districts, which would be their annual budgets, again, based on the student profile within each district. So Act 73 set up the redistricting task force to come up with their proposals. It came up with basically a lot of homework for the Agency of Education and for the tax department, because part of what it calls for is, I would say, boosting revenue by creating more than 2 categories of property taxes. Right now we have homestead property taxes, which is your permanent residence and 2 acres, and then everything else, whether it's an apartment building, a vacation home, a factory, or farmland. Everything else is taxed at the same rate. That extra category would be second homes, and we see that as a way to help assure that the vast majority of Vermonters, once Act 73 is fully implemented, will come out better than they went into it. Because what has been created since Act 60, Act 68, Act 46, although Act 46 is much more about governance and consolidation, is a system where what started off as being a really impressive amount of equalization through Act 60 and Act 68 to an era now where that has kind of run its course and we are back to an era of inequity across the state. I always point to, we can look at a student who lives in the southern part of Shoreham and attends Middlebury Union High School, and a student who lives in the northern part of Orwell and attends the Slate Valley Schools or Fairhaven. They might live a half a mile apart, but they have, their schools spend very different amounts of money providing opportunities for them at the high school level. And that inequity is really now apparent across the state, where we really do have neighboring districts where they spend significantly less on students than a district right next door. In my hometown of Montpelier, it's right next door to Barry, and you've got Barry, which is among the lowest spending districts, and Montpelier, which is among the highest spending districts. But back to Act 73, which does seek to correct this, as well as bend the cost curve on education by creating scale. Larger districts, the idea being that for many of the sort of services that a school provides, we either don't have enough students to justify them, and that many, and often in situations of specialized support services for students with high needs. And then we also have lots of duplicative services by having so many school districts, where you just think about payroll and sort of all the back office functions that go on. Curriculum coordination, just the superintendents in among themselves. Do we need 53 superintendents for a statewide school system of 83,000 students and dropping? So, when you build scale, it allows you to be more efficient in how you're delivering services. If you think about the number of districts, because they don't have, for example, enough students with high levels of autism to create sort of a special school within the school or a special level of services, we end up sending these students out of the district, sometimes out of the state, at very, very high costs, because we don't have the number of students to sort of justify hiring the specialists needed. That's just one example of how we try to build efficiencies. Act 73 it does those things, but for the moment, it is much more of a roadmap than it is implementing that. So by setting forth the redistricting commission, the hope was that work would lead to moving to larger districts, They have not been created. They have not been set in legislation yet. The funding formula for this, the foundation formula, continues to be evaluated and studied to make sure it will do what it needs to do. That has not been formalized in legislation yet. There is a lot of study that needs to be done about how we fund special education, how we fund and govern career and technical education. So Act 73 does do some very specific things. It did create the commission. It did assign a lot of work to the AOE and to the tax department. It did create new restrictions on public dollars going to independent schools and going out of state. But much of the rest of it, much of the real substantive work that would go in to this sort of vision of the future is intended and planned out in Act 73. But because you can't enact something for a future legislature, it is really there as the roadmap for future legislators. I think maybe I'll pause there and have you move on to the next speaker, to Wendy.
Thank you, Peter. I know it's a complicated situation. So we do have somebody who's actually going to have to do a lot of the creative thinking around that, and that's our superintendent in Addison Central Supervisory District. She has many cohorts around the state, but we're very fortunate to have Wendy, and I'll just give you a little background on Wendy Baker. Wendy came to us, to our school district in 2024 fall, so she's pretty new to us, but her resume around the state and in education is pretty extensive, so we're very fortunate to have her. Interestingly enough, she started tutoring at the Chittenden County Correctional Center. We just had our last presentation was about correctional center, so, and some of the conditions, so we appreciate you doing that. She earned a national board certification in middle school humanities. She served as a school improvement specialist within the Department of Education. She served as a middle school principal, and she was also the superintendent of the Orange East Supervisory Union. There's something I really wanted to share about Wendy Baker when I read some of her bio. Her work is rooted in social justice and equity, equitable teaching and leadership practices, socially just public policy, and positive organizational development. I think in the state of our world right now, I think that was very refreshing for me to see that she's so committed to that. So Wendy, thank you for coming and presenting for us.
Thank you, Mary. And thank you, Peter. There are a couple of other folks in the room I just want to acknowledge. The chair of our school board, Barb Wilson, is in the room. Barb is a fantastic public servant, and it's a pleasure to serve with her. We also have Dr. Sonia Afline, who is joining us here. Sonia is coming, she joins us in Addison Central from outside of Chicago as our Director of Inclusion, Equity, and Restorative Practice, which is a new position in Addison Central that relates to the strategic plan that the community developed. That actually was part of what brought me here. And I think we also have Jason Chance in the room in the back, who is a dedicated school board member. Am I missing anybody? Okay. So, listening to Peter, I think one of the things that those of us who are on the ground think about is ways to provide opportunities for kids. That's our frame for everything that we approach and the puzzles that we are trying to sort out. How do we use the conditions that surround us in order to translate that into opportunities for kids, whether those are curricular opportunities, extracurricular opportunities, ways for kids to be able to learn at accelerated rates, to learn in more supportive environments, to make home-school connections stronger, to help communities face the things they're facing, which is erosion. Peter alluded to a little bit of just general public service, and probably a little bit of what I know as a ninth generation Vermonter as our focus on the common good as opposed to the personal good. There's a little bit of that feels a little far away sometimes, and so trying to help communities wrap around that challenge and the role of a school in that challenge. That's all the work that we're doing while we are contending with the federal level, where if you've read the news today, there are articles about now we're just going to outwardly drain the U.S. Department of Education. That seems to be okay to say out loud now, and at the state level, there are the conversations that Peter is talking about, and Peter, I hope he can still hear me. It was a pleasure to work with him in the legislature last year. He is a staunch supporter of public education and kids, and he's an excellent legislator, and we're very lucky to have him. As a state, we're lucky to have him. I think he works in the context where not everyone is friendly to public education. There is a lot more dialogue around cost cutting than how are the kids doing and what do the kids need and how do we move forward in that way, and what does it mean for our communities if our kids do well. Addison Central's vision is that we are building community contributors, and I think that is it's one of the reasons again that drew me to Addison Central, because that's something I believe in greatly. And so this is not an era where public school building community contributors and the importance of community activity are alive and well everywhere. And so that's the biggest challenge that people in my position face. I'm very fortunate to be in this district where the communities here are supportive of education. They hold us to account, but are supportive, and ready to partner with us in terms of trying to find ways to support kids well. That still means that we are doing all the fancy footwork we can to make sure that our budgets are as low as possible, so that we are providing the opportunities that people feel are important, but we're also doing that in a way that doesn't price people out of their homes, which obviously is another consequence, right? That is not it's not helpful to the health of our communities. So we are in Addison Central, I think obviously we've all the superintendents, all the districts have supported the conversations. The Addison Central School Board has submitted testimony twice, in this process that's gone over the past almost a year, as in the political season, as Peter mentioned. I testified. I think our focus has been on maintaining student opportunity and strong classrooms. Anybody who's been where I've been might have heard me say that, that strong classrooms are what make a difference for kids. And that is what we need to be focused on most clearly. I think one of the things that I happen to have in my experience level is time working at the state level and administrative level in Vermont before taking a little bit of a hiatus to work in higher ed, which provided a wonderful perspective, and then coming back to public ed. When from 2000 to 2012, student performance in the state rose steadily at all ages. And I remember that time. I remember the coherence we had as a state. I remember the Agency of Education working collaboratively with superintendents to determine how do we best utilize federal grants, how do we pull together. There was, just to give you an example of what that time was like when those rises were happening. The Agency of Ed, where they got all kinds of federal grant money, as we still do now, would say to the superintendents, would you agree to pool some of your resources and begin institutes like Vermont Institutes or Vermont Reads or Vermont Mathematics Institute, Vermont Science Institute, so that we could, at scale, begin to deliver professional development that would make a difference in classrooms. And superintendents readily agreed to do that and work together to see that that happened. And that's the history that our educational community has since, I'm probably close to 30 years, in it. And that is what I think is very typical of many Vermont, entities. That feels like who we are. And it's difficult to watch the politicization of education. And I think if there's something that I and my superintendent colleagues stand in the breach of, is ensuring that children are not utilized in that process in a way that is not in their best interest. And so this climate has been challenging from that respect. And I'm happy to see the task force take 5,000 pieces of testimony and respond to that by saying that there should be a way forward that doesn't force mergers, that in a timeline that feels like a blunt trauma. And I'm also hoping that this legislative session brings the opportunity for us to be able to come together and work together so that we can move forward, which we have a very strong history of doing for decades over many things, in Vermont, in my experience. So that's a thumbnail sketch, and I know there are probably lots of sort of nuts and bolts things because we are in the same community, and there are maybe examples that I can be sharing if it's useful to your questions. But maybe that's enough for now.
Thank you. Thank you, Wendy. Yeah, so we'd like to open it up for questions. If anybody has any that they would like this to explore a little bit more. I think what you just said about some of the things that you're already looking at would be helpful for us to see how deep you're going. And Barb may have some things that she, as the board chair, would like to share with us too. So I'm going to open it up. Anybody have questions? John?
Yeah, yes. Oh, how should I do that? Do I need the microphone or?
I'm going to give you the microphone.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Hi, I wanted to ask Representative Conlon his thoughts about the task force's work, what it ultimately ended up basically stating for a recommendation, and knowing that is kind of off to a wrong foot with the governor. And as a member of the education, as the chair of the education committee, I know that you'll be dealing with the fallout from this and how it might frame any kind of legislation based on Act 73 and how it goes forward.
Yeah, thanks, John. It's a hard question. The report is not finalized yet from the task force, and their recommendation is currently encapsulated in, I think, a 170-page report, which I've only sort of skimmed through briefly. The challenge with what they have proposed, and first of all, I don't want to call it challenging because it's very thoughtful, and the task force that created it has some of the really best minds in Vermont when it comes to education. So it is to be taken very seriously and looked at very carefully. But what is being proposed does not necessarily move us in a direction sort of rapidly that builds scale quickly and addresses the inequities in a way that I think many communities across Vermont have been hungering for, where they see budgets being voted down repeatedly, having some of the lowest spending in the state, and wondering how that inequity is going to be fixed. The basic recommendations for building scale within the redistricting task force comes down to really a concept that exists in a lot of other states, a lot of bigger states, where sort of regional cooperative arrangements are made in order to provide many of those services. So think of it as all of Addison County and Rutland County getting together and creating one central office that would handle back office things like HR and payroll and supply buying and maybe busing, as well as perhaps figuring out how to provide within that broader area specialized services for students, just among many of the sort of examples. It's a concept that's worked well in other areas. I think it's one we've already considered and passed a bill last year or the year before, allowing those cooperative agreements to take place. What we have to be sort of careful of as we go forward is, a lot of the governor's agenda and a lot of what Act 73 is trying to do is bend the cost curve and get at, the real reaction people had to property taxes going up. And, we haven't even done that yet. My property taxes are going up $1,700 in the next year, in addition to healthcare costs continuing to skyrocket. So these cooperative arrangements, they really require some investment on the state side. Might still require the state to be mandatory in forming them. It does not reduce the number of central offices we have around the state, though it might help reduce the number of people in those central offices. But I think we have to be very careful about not being duplicative. Our designated mental health agencies across the state, to sort of say there's one in every county, was really in part of their goal is to fulfill that role when it comes to mental health services in schools. But really, for many reasons, none of which are their own fault, but wages and lack of people around or whatever, what we really have now is a duplicative dual system where the mental health agencies do what they do with kids in schools, and the schools, being unable to have gotten the services they needed from those mental health agencies, have hired their own people and almost have their own mental health agencies. And so, we need to figure out how we can do this without being duplicative, more expensive, adding another layer of bureaucracy. There are some really great examples of these cooperative agencies, being able to cut down on some of these costs that could be shared. And so it's not to be discounted. And the other thing that the redistricting task force, reflects, and I'm on the Commission on the Future of Public Education, and we've also been through our own sort of public comment process with really responses from thousands and thousands and thousands of Vermonters expressing real concern about Act 73, the pace at which it is moving, and its potential impact on sort of what the future of the education delivery system is in Vermont. So, we're going to look at the recommendations of the task force very carefully, see how it fits in, but also see how, very importantly, how does it reflect what Vermonters need and what Vermonters are hoping for.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Any other question?
Please identify yourself.
Hi, my name is Lily, and I'm a senior at Middlebury, but I'm from Brattleboro. And I am curious on, obviously, Act 73 in Brattleboro is also really, really complicated, especially since it is a poor school district. And I am wondering if you think Act 73 will affect students' access to APs, and Middlebury, for example, is the only school district with IBs. And do you think that this new form of creating standards will affect students' abilities to excel in public school settings in Vermont?
I'm not sure which one of us you would like to answer that, but I can give it a go. Peter? I think your question actually speaks to how things are done, you
Can
know.
people hear her?
Is that okay? I just hope that this was working over here. So, if we, for example, dissolve the current districts and begin new districts, then our IB accreditation and our NEASC accreditation as an Addison Central district, which is what allows that programming in Middlebury High School, disappears. Unless there is some provision for those things to transfer. But, the discussions so far have landed more on the side of dissolve the old and begin anew in a manner that would perhaps allow for different levels of administrative efficiency and so on and so forth. So those are concerns that I think it's all part of the detail of how things happen. That said, if Addison Central and Rutland Northeast, which is just to our south, said, why don't we partner together and work that out, then those things don't necessarily have to happen in the same way. And so I think your question speaks to what I feel is important, which is how these things take place really matters to students greatly. The graduation standards that you mentioned are a much needed improvement and a good idea. I think the challenge that we are experiencing is that that process at the moment is led by the Agency of Education, and it is focused on having 23 credits-ish to graduate. Middlebury High School currently has 22 and a half. There's a range between 16 and 25 in the state, according to the information that the AOE provided for us just a little while ago. And the way to get to higher and more consistent standards is not necessarily number of credits. And those of us who are on the ground know that and understand that. It's really what are the learning opportunities that students have. And what does that look like? And so we're anxious for the conversation to begin to get to that level, because that is what matters for students. And I understand that the state board will take testimony on that for probably at least a 6-month period, I'm hoping. And so our hope is that we're going to begin to be able to introduce those types of points into the conversation and move the work in that direction. I don't know if I answered everything that you mentioned, but I hope that was helpful.
Do you think that the standard?
I might chime in with a bit of a different perspective.
Really?
Nothing in Act 73 talks about whether a school can offer AP classes or have an IB program. It's really about consolidated governance and building scale. Now, if we were to create an Addison County sort of single governed school district that operated 2, 3, 4 high schools, it's really up to the governing board how that might operate. They could adopt IB, for example, at all schools. They could have IB at no schools, or they could say, Middlebury Union High School is going to continue to be an IB school, or Addison Central continue to be an IB, K-12 system, and the others will be different, and will let folks in the district choose where they want to go. It could be any of these things. Act 73 does not direct how schools do that or how districts do that. And then, yes, graduation, the AOE is definitely looking at what would be a graduation standard for all students in Vermont. I guess I would call it a minimum. But I assume that those, first of all, it's still a work in progress, but secondly, I assume you can meet these requirements through AP classes, IB classes, CTE classes, what have you.
I guess my question gets at, obviously this bill has the possibilities to be good and bad in a lot of ways, and it presents a lot of uncertainty overall for the state. And is there any possibility that by setting more statewide standards, there would create a standard of public education across all of the large school districts when it comes to the opportunities and the programs that are accessed to help students have an equal opportunity to get into good schools and things like that that are not as available at the poorer, larger districts in our state?
I would say that, I think Wendy can probably answer this a little better than I can, but when it comes to the funding of this, it is really trying to do exactly that, and that is to create that equity. You know, Addison Central spends over $20,000 per student and offers just a phenomenal program and available opportunities. Fairhaven, just down the road where Addison County kids actually go to school as well, you know, spends, you know, more like $13,000 per student, and is just, with that level of funding, unable to provide the level of opportunity and the ability to sort of build that resume to, you know, get into the highly selected schools if that's the goal of the students. So that is one thing that the bill does try to address with a foundation formula for funding.
Yeah, I would agree with Peter that is the promise of the bill. And I think, you know, I have colleagues around the state who are attempting to pass budgets at $10,000 a student and $12,000 a student, and those budgets go down. And so in those places, you know, kids do not have the opportunities. One of the things that Act 73 does in the class size portions of the bill, which in part is actually thanks to Peter's leadership on the House Committee, is to preserve smaller class sizes at the high school level that go with some of the courses that relate to specific supports and interests. So whether they are diploma program courses or AP courses or auto tech courses in technical centers or whatever it is, that there's an understanding that kids have a variety of passions and interests and needs when they're at that level, and our best public dollar supports all of that. And that doesn't translate into the same class size formulas that we might be able to apply at other levels. And so that's a hope. We do need to create a different level of equity, and I hear the superintendents across the state agreeing with that process and that point readily. It's just you know, how can we begin to actually have that right conversation? I think that's the thing that we probably are all chomping at the bit to do.
We've run out of batteries. Hang on, no, here it is. It came on.
Hi, my name is John Frieden. I live in Middlebury. I want to ask this to Peter Conlon. Peter, and you've been involved in this battle for a long time. Can you provide some specific examples, and by how much, the consolidation of school districts has reduced per pupil costs anywhere in the country?
I'm not a scholar of this, so I can't speak to anything outside Vermont. And I can't really speak generally to Vermont. But what I can tell you is, certainly through the testimony we've received in the House Education Committee, in many districts, Act 46 consolidation led to significant savings. Now, that may not be reflected in tax bills because, as often happens, school districts, when they save money in one place, redeploy it in other places. You know, you can think about our incredible need across the state for building work and capital projects. So, you know, there's no piece of data out there that says that Act 46 saved this much money, because we don't know what districts did with those savings, whether they passed them on to taxpayers or whether they redeployed that money in other necessary areas. I can tell you on the Addison Central School District, it yielded savings.
How much?
And
How much
that
savings on a per pupil basis, Peter? Was it 5%, 20%?
I don't have the answer to that.
But you're asking,
you know,
you're asking
if
the
a
whole
district-
state.
if a district
You're
that
asking the
has a
whole
$40
state.
million budget
John.
saves $2 million in one-time savings. You know, that's still savings to the taxpayer. I mean, we have the budgets of 2024 were voted down across the state, not in Addison Central, which shows always great, strong support. And, you know, there were political realities that I think Vermonters told us we needed to respond to.
One of the things that your question is making me think about is something actually that was brought to light by the Commission on the Future of Vermont Education as they did their work. They were very clear that this is not a either or. We need to put lots of pieces to this puzzle together. All the superintendents in district and central offices in the state are about 5% of the money that we spend. Even if we cut all that in half, you know, and I'm sure we could reduce them in some way. You know, okay, so there's 2%. I think what we're missing is a vision that we all agree to work toward, whether that is strong regional high schools that provide the opportunity that we want for all of our youth of those ages. And for example, and what would we need to do as a state in order to achieve that? Both the capital construction needed to ensure that that's okay, so that every kid has the opportunity to be on a Division I state championship football team, right? You know, I mean, we know good opportunity when we see it, and that's what I know scale to achieve, is opportunity. If you are only cutting from a system and our students don't benefit, then the promise of equity isn't realized. So maybe it's having fewer central office staff, whether that's superintendents or HR directors across the state, or, you know, we have 4 folks on our finance team to manage $52 million. You know, they could probably manage $100 million in the same team, right? So I think there are some economies of scale. We also have to, you know, sort of determine what are the ways in which our communities benefit from our smallest schools, and how do they benefit from those regional opportunities for our older students, and what is the balance of that, and how can we come together to have those conversations with a vision that we all feel good about and good about marching forward on, because we can't provide opportunity if we don't find some way in which to streamline what we're currently doing. You know, that's just a balance sheet. We're not going to provide more opportunity without being more careful about how we're currently deploying our resources in that way. And those are important conversations to have. So there is no one strategy that I've seen that says this is the silver bullet. It really is going to require us coming together and thinking about a lot of these pieces, building a vision forward, and then determining how are we doing on our way to getting there. And you know, again, we have done that well as a state when we have been given the opportunity in the past, and I look forward to seeing that come before us again.
You know, I would just add to that. You know, one of the areas, Vermont is an outlier in many ways in terms of our, you know, student staff ratios and per pupil spending. But we're also an outlier when it comes to special education costs, very high, and in the number of students that we identify. And a lot of that, and because we don't have scale within our systems, a lot of those costs are very high because we rely on sort of out-of-district placements, out-of-state placements, private entities providing those services, rather than having enough students sort of within our governance structures to provide those services within sort of in-house at a significantly reduced cost. And you can build scale through larger districts. You can build scale through using these cooperative arrangements. They both are getting at the same goal. And I also would just like to emphasize, doing nothing means we just sort of stay the course of school boards every fall deciding, okay, what can our taxpayers tolerate? And where can we cut to get the budget to a point where they will tolerate it? And what we have going on now is hard and it's challenging. And having been in the business for 17 years on the school board, it was really painful, and it's led to many hard, difficult conversations that didn't really yield results when I was there. But at a certain point with declining enrollment, those discussions get pushed to the forefront.
Sure.
I just have a quick question. I have 2 kids and moms right now. So I've got an invested interest in all this. I know that you don't have a crystal ball, but with the task force not doing what the governor wanted them to do, what does a timeline look like for this coming legislative session for this, or like what's happening? Like what can we expect as parents?
Well, so first of all, Act 73 had, essentially a 5-year, I guess including this year, phase in with another 5 years of the tax impacts and the funding impacts being phased in. So overall, a 10-year phase in. So, there's a lot of things that have to be in place in order for the changes to take place. We have to have a funding formula that works. We have to figure out how to fund career technical education. We have to make sure that we are not shortchanging special education. We have to figure out what to do with debt if we consolidate into larger districts. Some districts have, imagine you're being, put together with Winooski and Burlington, which together have $250 million worth of debt. So there's a lot of unanswered questions. So what's laid out in Act 73 is probably the most fastest that something could happen. But if hitting all of those milestones, I would call a Herculean task. And, with sort of not being presented with easy maps that we can just vote on, that's probably going to set us back further. And the future, I would say, of this is we laid out a path. We knew that there were going to be lots of challenges along the way. Some people have called them sort of exit ramps. I would call them just things that if we don't accomplish them, then the plan doesn't move forward. So, my crystal ball is very foggy.
Some of the things that we're trying to do to ready ourselves for whatever the future may hold, and Addison Central, I'm assuming, are similar in other districts. Our board is in the midst of creating a capital improvement plan that's required by the Agency of Education. And as we're looking at each of our buildings, we're looking at, okay, what is its current state? If it were to continue in its current state, what would be needed for a capital investment? And then what is an alternate state that we might imagine, So if we are in a different configuration and that building is accepting students from other towns, for example, how many of those students might that be? And what would the capital investment cost be in order to be able to accommodate that, so that we're understanding a range of that as we are in this process. Right now, I think, John did a nice article relative to the high school and thinking about, all right, if that becomes a high school because it's attached to the technical center, that all of a sudden now has 1,000 students across Addison Central or Addison County, what would that mean? What kinds of repairs or additions or improvements or investments would be needed in order to ensure that that is a facility that might meet the opportunity needs that would go along with that kind of work. So that's an example of something that we're trying to do right now related to that. It's kinds of forward thinking that positions ourselves for three things at the same time. The best we can to be prepared to follow the legislative process and be ready when we're asked to make operational moves that are mattering to students.
It seems to me that the elephant in the room is closing schools. And I don't know all these act numbers, but where we consolidated, that was one of the visions. And I wonder whether you think that's ever going to come to pass.
Well, go ahead, Peter.
Act 46 was accused of being a bill that was designed to close schools. The simple fact is what closes schools is running out of children. As our numbers go down, that is what prompts the discussions about fewer schools. Really, nothing else requires it or calls for it. But as we go from a state of 120 odd thousand students to a state of 65,000 students, we have to think very seriously about, the cost of operating and maintaining all of that. But more importantly, and I think Wendy has just done tremendous work at Addison Central recognizing that there's a real cost to students when you don't have a critical mass within the classroom.
In Addison Central, I think the amendment I might make to Peter's point is that student opportunity can mean changes in how school facilities are utilized. I mean, our school board, next week will consider whether or not to keep Ripton Elementary School open. I think that conversation has been covered, by the Addison Independent well. And we've gone through a long process to determine what that looks like and what the options are. And they'll also consider whether or not to support a partnership between Shoreham and Bridport to be able to have students learn together in one school in a K-5 and to be able to ensure that we can meet the needs of preschoolers, particularly in that part of Addison County. That really is about student opportunity, and that's a place where, for example, as the board considers that, they're considering a plan that essentially brings the whole instructional staff from one school into the other school, doubles the resources, and makes it so that the professionals are managing half the students in their delivery of those resources. So that's designed to accelerate academic growth in that way. And that's what I mean by opportunity. That's what makes that worth it right now. It's $500,000 essentially. If we were to not operate Ripton and not operate, one other school, which is not nothing, but it's 1%. Less than 1% of our budget. Now across the state, right, if everybody's doing that, obviously that can add up. I think what I appreciate so much about being part of Addison Central is that the first place that people consider is what do the kids need? And how do we provide that in the most efficient manner? And I think I would love to see that this conversation turn more in that direction as we move into this next legislative session, because I think that is where the consensus is around the state, and that is where we can build coalitions that can work together to accomplish a shared vision of that nature. And, I'm sure I value investing in our kids, right? I don't know how we survive as a state if we don't. And so there, I think there's another important component to, when schools need to either change the nature of their operation, right? Or recede from operation, sometimes temporarily, sometimes, permanently. And I think those are active conversations across the state.
He's handing it along. Tom Dickinson from Middlebury. I would like to return to the report of the task force, which is not finalized, as you say. But as I understand it, they reached a conclusion, or they decided that they could not say that this structure that was proposed would necessarily save costs. It might or it might not. They were also concerned that it would not be politically acceptable. It would be very, very difficult to implement, to get people to buy into it. And then I haven't seen much of the details of what they proposed, the ideas that they proposed as an alternative. But I think part of that was using the experience with BOCES, Boards of Cooperative Educational Services, that are in other states like New York, which I had some experience with. And they do work, apparently. But I would like to hear the reaction to the report of the task force, such as it stands now.
Well, again, I haven't had a chance to read all through it and really study it in great detail. It's pretty dense. It's got a lot of just a great deal of information in it. So, they both Act 73 as envisioned, as well as the redistricting task force. They're both designed to use scale as a tool to be more efficient and more cost effective. Just sort of different ways of going about it. Boards of Cooperative Educational Services need to be created, funded, started. Sort of like, it's almost like starting a separate entity that needs seed money to get rolling. And going to, sort of state-imposed larger districts does that in a much more sort of top-down way, but they're both after the same thing, and that is to use scale as a tool to be more efficient and more cost-effective. Now, there's no question that we live in a democracy, and and that legislating is a very human business, and that not only this report, but the reaction of Vermonters that have been coming in, by the thousands through formal channels and informal channels, none of that is to be ignored, and it will have, I'm sure, a significant impact as we move forward.
Anybody else have comments? I'd like to make one comment. One of the things that I'm hearing out of Peter and Wendy that are slightly different, Peter's emphasis seems to be on cost. Wendy's is on what do the kids get out of this? We need to marry those two. Yes, we need to reduce the costs, but maybe we do that by raising taxes on the higher level taxes, the taxpayers, rather than forcing a condensation. I mean, the 22,000 students in Chittenden is crazy when the whole state is going to be, when you get small, that would be a quarter of the students. And I'd like to know what your reactions to my comment are.
Let me make clear that, part of the reasons of Act 73 is because we have such inequity in what we're able to offer students across the state based on the amount of money that each district spends. When you have a district that spends $10,000, $11,000, $12,000 per student next to a district that spends $22,000 per student, there's a great inequity into what is being able to be offered to those students. So I don't want it to be just about cost. It is very much about equity of opportunity and, for students at all grade levels.
I would agree. I would also say that, money doesn't guarantee opportunity. So, if we were to give, my colleague in Barry the same amount of money that we're spending here, it would take her a while to build the capacity to be able to spend that money in a manner in which the students would feel that. That is not going to happen overnight. And I think that one of the benefits of the cooperative service boards, however we phrase that term here in Vermont, CSAs is actually very apropos on Vermont brand, I think. What that allows is to free up funds in a manner that can disperse them to create opportunity in a planful manner, so that the existing superintendents are able to say, here's what I can do, here's how we could grow opportunity, here's what that would look like in districts where they need more funding in order to be able to do that. Here's the plan, and then that funding can ramp up in that way to achieve the plan. But there are only a certain number of teachers who want to teach in Montgomery, Vermont, right? If you give my colleague Lynn Coda, enough money to hire all kinds of staff, she has vacancies already. That's not going to help her in that respect. So I think understanding more directly what would help, what are the plans that are needed from the people who are already trying to balance this opportunity growth for students would help. It would help produce a plan that we could then begin to execute efficiently and earnestly, over time. And I also, the thing that I would add to your list of things that are important to me, it's not only what do the kids get out of it, but it's what do the communities get out of it. I have appreciated so much our board's partnership and meaningful interest in the community of Ripton. As we have gone through a process, and worked together over the last almost year now, to help them to reconcile, the challenges that they're having in terms of their student population and the way housing, works from that, into what could the next chapter be. I would like to see from the governor's office an intentional focus on the health of Vermont communities. And what does that look like? Because I think that is in part what is beyond the scope of a school district to take on. And yet that is what we are trying to hold with communities who are deeply worried that if we make a change in attendance in a school for students, perhaps for all the reasons that anyone might agree are important, there's an outward migration economically and socially and otherwise in these towns. And what does that mean, and how do they recover, and what does that look like? That conversation is not alive in the state right now that is in any way palatable to me. And I think that is a missing piece. And Peter, to his credit, in his committee has discussed some of those things, like what are resources that could be provided to communities as they re-envision their path and what that might look like. And That's part of why, our team has thought about the utilization of both buildings differently in service to the needs of kids, and also what better thing to offer young families than, programming for young children, that is close to home. And so what are ways that we can creatively think about doing that when there's a real need to do that? And having some support to think through that in partnership with communities across the state, I think would be helpful.
Wendy, I think you have about 1,750 students. So my question is, if instead of having 1,750 students, you're part of a district which has between 4,000 and 8,000 students, which was the guideline set in Act 73, what, if any, changes do you anticipate in community activity and parental involvement in the schools?
Addison County is a good example of a move to that level, right? We have about 4,000 students across the county. And so, in Vermont, we like to know our leaders. And, I sat down with a mom this morning, who is trying to figure out a way to help her daughter who's not thriving in the way that she'd like her to thrive. And she came into my office in hopes that if she shared what she was experiencing with me, I might have ideas, that could help her find a pathway forward. Vermonters are used to that level of access to their leaders. And I think as we grow in scale, in order to maintain that, we would either have to have a mid-level management, right, group that is able to provide that level of support, because oftentimes principals are not the right person for that conversation, depending upon what it is, in that way. We parents would just have to accept that that's not available to them anymore, in that. We might be at a place where many parents are perfectly happy to make that transition. I think those are some of the unknowns. I don't think we've been able to have those types of conversations in ways that actually surface our places of agreement, so that we could plan with those places of agreement in mind. I imagine that if we were a district of 4,000 Addison County students, that the $123 million that we all currently spend, including the technical center, could be utilized in a way that would be more forward thinking, because we would reduce duplication, and I think there is some truth to that. And I don't want to shy away from the fact that there is truth to that. I would, if we could have one director of finance and I could take that extra money that's spent in the other directors of finance, right? And I could put that to use that kids will feel in a different kind of way. Those are all wins. I think the question really is the point of this more heavily weighted toward doing what is important for our kids and our community, or is it more heavily weighted toward doing what is important for trimming cost, which is related to many things, and how much of that is unnecessarily falling onto the backs of the education system, just because it's the way it's been and it's the way we've thought about those things. So.
But inevitably, if you're going to accomplish what Peter wants to accomplish, and that is prevent schools from spending $10,000 a pupil and spending $20,000 a pupil, you're not going to end up with everybody spending 20, right? So somebody like Middlebury may end up spending less, right? Now, what do you do about that?
I think it's important that you hear superintendents' voices saying if I had the right structure, maybe I'd only need 18, right? Maybe I'd only need 18 to do the same thing or to do more than I'm able to do right now. And there is some truth to that. And I want to make sure that I'm saying that clearly, because that's not fair for me not to do that. I think the worry that I carry in this, in feeling responsible for the students in Addison Central, is that I won't have enough agency to be able to say what I need and to be able to trim where I can. That those decisions will be made by someone else who doesn't know what I know, who doesn't see what I can see, who doesn't hear what I hear, and who doesn't care in the way that I care because of my position and my experience. So, that is the nexus of the worry that I carry. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I think most of my superintendent colleagues would probably say the same thing.
It's well said, very nice. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Judy Albright, and I'm a retired elementary school teacher, and I taught in New York State. But my question is if I was a teacher right now, what would be those worries? What would I be feeling that weight of? Because people don't know what I know, and they don't hear what I hear, and they don't have the experience that I've had. So what would be my worries, do you think? And maybe maybe your teachers are already talking to you, but also hopefully, do you have any hope for me as that teacher, that this is going to bring about something that'll make my job, better and easier, and that love that I have for children, it'll be enhanced, let's put it that way, and recognized.
I'm always careful when I speak for our teachers. So with that caveat, I will say that the worries that I hear are that that someone else will make a decision that doesn't have the eyes that they have and the ears that they have and the experiences that they're experienced, which includes me in that way. And so, we all have that at scale in that sense. I think what is it's deeply front of mind for, I would say, the majority of our teachers is holding kids in this world that does not have the same level of supports, of community supports, of mentoring supports, sometimes of family supports. The electronics have changed the nature of a youth's experience in our society dramatically. Holding kids there and ensuring that they reach high expectations. There's the New York Times, and the Boston Globe just ran stories that spoke to how difficult it is to actually get into and stay in what they're referring to as the middle class. And that's real for a number of our students. And teachers see that every day. And they hold that burden of being able to find a way to support a child well enough to be able to help them to access a path that is going to enable them to have a future that will be more stable, perhaps, than the future that they're experiencing. And there are a good number of our students that present that worry for our educators. I think they feel confident in their abilities to do that through their own individual efforts. They don't necessarily have confidence, perhaps because of some of the Act 46 changes, perhaps because of the impact of the pandemic. They don't necessarily have systemic confidence that there is a system behind them that will pick up where they can no longer reach. And that's the same worry I have. You know, the AOE has lost 40% of their capacity since the time that I worked there. And their compass a little bit, you know, in terms of what are we doing and how are we doing it. And I have worries that I don't have backing for what's beyond my reach. So I think that's really a type of worry that we share. Families, by the way, I hear have the same worry. You know, they're trying to hold what they can, and they're not sure if the school system is there, you know, when beyond their reach. And so it's finding ways to build shared understanding of how to work together that I think, you know, will take some time, but do have the hope of allowing us to make use of each other's efforts in ways that students will feel.
I know we're getting close to the end, so we're gonna take a couple more questions and then.
Ellen Cronin from Middlebury. So whether we're managing for equity among students or whether we're managing for opportunities of students, and with all that has been happening in just the education system, how do we keep teachers encouraged and keep teachers excited about teaching when we are in a situation where we often have to tell them no?
Do you want to take that one, Peter?
I think that's probably a better question for a career educator.
The best thing for a teacher's heart is the love of a kid, right? And being able to share in that. And so helping teachers understand the way that they're making a difference and giving rise to their ideas about how we can continue to make a difference and listening to them when they tell us what they need. I think that is of paramount importance. And it is something that, we have a long history of in Vermont. I also, I wonder if it isn't time to give them opportunities to speak up, in ways that we've shielded them from, I think out of a protectionist opportunity, so far. I think there is something to be said for saying your piece and for being given opportunities to do that and to do that well. And I think that is a way in which I saw Peter run the House Committee last year. It was really to invite practitioners to share their expertise in a number of ways. And I would love to see us work together from the legislature and the field to enable inquiry questions, for example, to come out that we can share across our system and say, anyone who has an interest in contributing to this question can do so like this, so that people have an opportunity to share what their experiences are, to help people understand, not in a defensive way where you're saying what you don't like or what you don't think someone should do, but what is it that you do think should happen? If we have the right people and the right resources and the right time to do the right thing, then we need to be able to focus more squarely on that opportunity. And I think that's something that I hear our staff having an increasing readiness for, and I hope is something that is in front of us as we move forward through this next political season.
I might talk a little bit about sort of the politics of doing education policy at the sort of legislative and higher level. It's not fun. It's generally a lose-lose situation because when you sort of change what people hold dear, and Vermonters hold our school system dear, it's just not popular. But we have a situation that, we need to address, and the voters have told us that, which is affordability, sort of addressing the declining enrollment that has taken place. And we have to try to sort of respond to what the voters have said in a political environment that also includes a governor who wields a significant amount of control, and is not a fan of new taxes, new fees, and who also, despite having sort of proposed a massive piece of legislation, has not been out there selling it to Vermonters in venues like this, or in other sort of real people-to-people ways. I can tell you, as both a school board chair and a school board member, dealing with difficult conversations. We talked about school closures during my time as well. It didn't make us very popular in the community, and it's really, we would just assume not to do this. We would just assume not, have to cut a single penny, or, we would like to give schools everything they want and children to have all the opportunities possible, just as we'd like every Vermonter to have affordable health insurance. But we would sort of work within a finite world of resources and sort of political realities. And that's sort of where we are and where we're trying to thread a very difficult needle. The work's going to continue, and it's going to be iterative and evolve for sure. But especially when it comes to education, it's really not a matter of political party. It's really about where you're from, what you have, what you don't have. Rural, urban, all of those things play into a choice, no choice. And building consensus when there really is none is hard, and ultimately hard decisions have to be made at one level or another. And that's sort of what we're reckoning with.
So I just have a question about Drew from Middlebury. I just have a question that as boards grow larger, how can we ensure that the rights of our BIPOC, queer, English language learner students are protected?
But I don't think there's any intent to have larger boards, just larger districts. And I think, school districts are governed by elected boards. I think that I think across Vermont, depending on the area you're from politically, you would see different levels of many of those protections that you're talking about. But we at the state level have to ensure in law those protections. I think Vermont's done an outstanding job doing that. But, a lot of that boils down to, what Vermonters want, and Vermont has had just a simply a long tradition of that we have to hope continues as we evolve.
One of the things that I think you're talking about, generally speaking, Drew, is school safety. Whether that is emotional safety for students, or otherwise. And I think this is one of the details that the field struggles with. I currently supervise 8 principals. I talk with 3 of them every day, at least. And those are things that have come up that they would like some counsel or advice on. And it might be new experiences, or it might be, I'm thinking about it this way, is this a good way to lead this forward, things of that nature. If I am, the superintendent of Addison County, I'll have significantly more principals unless I have someone else that's helping me with that supervision load, which our district office currently doesn't have in that way. So, there are real considerations and practicalities that are important to consider when you have a number of schools that are going to have low enrollment unless, and I know this is a significant passion of Peter's, there is a capital construction funding that is, able to be released. For example, Maple Run, which is the St. Albans area, that school district, they have, I think, 2,600 students, and I think they have 4 schools. We have 8 and 1,750 schools. So, unless we're able to change our configuration such that the superintendent can support building principals in a manner that maintains those levels of safety and ensures that human tendencies, right, which is often to do the most comfortable thing, don't rule the day, and so that we maintain those standards that are so important to Vermont. It will be a challenge. And so, Peter has often said that capital construction has to be part of this equation. I'm not sure where those funds are coming from. And when you add those funds in, I think any savings that we found has been blown entirely out of the water. I might not have that math right. I'm not close to that math, as I'm sure many others are. But those are things that I think we need to come to the table to discuss in a way that feels real.
Thank you. And I think we're finished with the questions. And I thank you both for your discussion.